announce the second presentation today. It's Tech Development Update, Chris Sangwin, University of Edinburgh. So we can proceed on the second presentation today. This one not pre-recorded, but given by Chris. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me back again. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Chris Sangwin. I'm in the Maths Department at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm one of the developers of Stack. I instigated the Stack project, and I'm going to give you an update on developments. So we had an in-person conference in Austria. It's been postponed, so the International Stack Users Group met. There were about 35 people in person and 100 people in total. I'm very grateful to the organisers for arranging that. I had some misgivings about going, I'll be honest. I had planned to stay in the UK this year, this calendar year, but I'm very glad I changed my mind and went. It was good for very many reasons, actually. So if you haven't managed to get to an in-person meeting yet, I encourage you to do so. There's the convenience of EAMS online, but there was something quite special about actually sitting down and chatting through issues with colleagues. So I'm very grateful to the conference organisers for arranging that. All the details of the software are on stackassessment.org. So let me just show you this website now. If you're not familiar with that, please, training and events. There's a whole bunch of case studies of how we're using Stack. And I'm going to talk about the HELM case study in a minute, so I'll come back to that one. You can link to the demo site and the documentation. And on that front, I'm very excited to announce that we're able to offer hosting Stack with Adena. So if we come back to the website, if you scroll to the bottom, there are other ways to find this link on this website, but if you go to hosting with Adena, many people in the UK will be familiar with Adena. Adena is based at the University of Edinburgh. It is now offering a hosted Moodle with Stack. If you have difficulty setting up your own server, or you don't have the ability to install Stack on your own server or so on, then Adena will be able to help with a hosted service. Your institution almost certainly already consumes services from Adena. They're world class, and I have every confidence that they're going to do an excellent job in hosting the Stack service. Setting up Stack has always been probably the most significant barrier to use, and I'm very glad that this is one way we can reduce that barrier. What have I been up to? As well, I'm in the middle of just about the annual update cycle. Really, we're preparing our teaching for next year already. We're checking our materials, and we're getting things ready. So we'll be releasing a version of Stack sometime at the end of this month or the beginning of next month. It all depends on what happens with the testing. We're testing our materials and just finishing those things off. So there is still time, if you send me a pull request, to get new features in for the next. I have a limited amount of time to develop things from scratch myself, but if there are things you really want, please ask, and we'll put them on the list. So what are the new features for the next year? The first is just running to keep up, really. Stack is part of the ILIAS learning environment and part of the Moodle learning environment. So I have to constantly keep up with the new versions of those bits of software. And Moodle 4 has some significant changes in it, which I'll come on to. So we will be adding support for Moodle 4. There are some unglamorous internal rewriting, which unblocks progress and does all sorts of things. So the PRTs, the potential response trees, are the algorithms which assess the students' answers. So we've re-engineered the way that the algorithms that assess answers are dealt with internally. And CASText is the computer algebra active text. That's the text in which allows you to embed Maxima code into the text. So when you write the question, you want to embed variables and things. So we've re-engineered both of these core components, and then we've got some genuinely new features. So quite a lot this year. So Moodle have re-engineered the way that the Moodle question database works. And one of the upshots of that is that the database now stores versions of the question. So when you edit your Moodle questions, you have a history of your previous edits, which of course has major advantages for question authors who want to try things out and then go back. Trying to fix a broken question will no longer be a fraught of trying to remember what you've done. But this does mean that there's an extra layer in the database now of versions. You don't just have questions, but you have versions of the questions. So this means please don't use older versions of Stack with Moodle 4. You'll have to wait for me to release the next version and then upgrade if you're using Moodle 4. But please don't use older versions of Stack. The core works fine. I've got no real concerns, but some of the some of the edge case things will not work because Moodle has changed. So the rewrites of the potential response trees and the CASText is thanks to Matti. Matti Harila of Aalto has done a huge amount of work over the last 2 years, and this is the result. I'm very grateful to Matti's ongoing support for this project. He's a key person, one of the 3 Stack developers, and this, of course, is all internal, and question authors won't see much, but there will be some subtle differences. So in the past, the way the Stack question was marked is we made multiple calls to the computer algebra system, and now each tree is a single Maxima statement. I'll demonstrate that in a minute. It's literally one piece of Maxima code for the whole tree. So that has huge efficiency gains. People who are reporting slowdown with very complicated trees, those will run almost as quickly now as a simple tree because it's just one call to the CAS, and that's what's really expensive. This also means that the marks and penalty fields can actually be variables now. I made an early design decision that they would be numbers and not variables, and then having made that decision, we were kind of stuck with it for years. And this re-engineering unblocks that and allows us, so you can define the marks in a variable field. And this is a real case of where I didn't really understand or envisage how people might use the software, but having seen some compelling use cases as why that's really useful, I now understand what other people need and I can see the point of it. So I'm very happy that we've managed to get that done. You can now include code fragments and text from an arbitrary URL. And this is quite exciting because it will make it possible for non-developers to create and use libraries and share those libraries between questions. And this, I hope, will make it easier for people to contribute. And I'm going to show you one example in a minute of how that contribution can happen and how it can be valuable for everybody. Another thing is that students can download text files. So if they've got a data set to work on, you can randomly generate a data set and the students can download it. That's a very useful feature for better support for stats. And we've got much better support for JavaScript. So in particular, the computer algebra system can generate JavaScript with randomly generated parameters in it in a much more efficient way. So again, for people who want to write JavaScript, then we've got much better support for that. And of course, there's plenty of efficiency and security improvements inside, none of which people will see unless they break. So if I've broken some of your older questions, I'm sorry, these are genuine improvements. Please, if you have the opportunity to download the pre-release version from the dev branch and test your stuff now, would be a good opportunity to start testing, please, and let me know if you have any problems before we release the software. The earlier we start testing, the better, really. Okay, so one example of code fragments which can be included in a URL came from the Stack conference. Some colleagues in Germany demonstrated some very exciting new features of Stack, which they had written some Maxima code that they were cutting and pasting from question to question to question. I think now in the new version that would be on a library that they could include with a URL, but actually these features are so important that we put them into the core and we will maintain them. It's to do with the Damerau-Levenshtein distance. So I didn't know about this until April, and the colleagues showed me this, but what this does is it measures the distance between strings. Okay, so it allows us to do string matching. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to show you this question on my, where are we? Here we are. This is Coulomb. This is literally my development machine in Edinburgh. So let's go to the solve quadratic and preview this question. So this is what the question does. So there are some standard kind of stack on the right-hand column. What are we supposed to do? For each step in the algebraic derivation, either complete the calculation in each step or explain what has been done. So we either complete the calculation or explain what's been done. So let's complete the calculations first. So factor the constant term, so x minus 8 all squared minus 5 squared equals 0. So this is a kind of standard stack question. And hence, okay, so we're going to solve the equation x equals 3 or 13. So for those people who are relatively new to stack, there is a sort of validation step which separates out correctness from validation. This is parsed as x equals 3 or 13. So that's not what we meant. We want x equals 3 or x equals 13, right? I mean, it's pretty obvious what the student meant. Unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of strict syntax. You have to say what you mean and not just assume people understand what you mean. Anyway, that's the stack side of it. And then what have we done here? Well, complete the square. And then if we check that, that's correct. And what have we done here? We've done difference of 2, right? And I made a couple of obvious spelling mistakes there. And the system picks up that that's the difference of 2 squares and it's judged it to be correct, right? So I think this ability to actually accept text strings and establish whether or not they're acceptable text strings is a really exciting addition. And what the colleagues, I'll show you the documentation for that. This is the documentation. It's on the development. This is not on the main. This hasn't been released yet. But what this distance is, it's a pure metric. It's a genuine metric between strings, and it's basically the number of character edits, so insertions, deletions, transitions, or substitutions. And it was added by Achim and Andreas. And what they were doing is they had written the algorithm in Maxima to calculate this metric. It's a standard metric. It goes back to the 1960s, and it actually underlies spell checking and autocomplete. It's widely used in spell checking and autocomplete. So the advantage of using this particular algorithm is that there is an inbuilt spell check in this already. And they have designed a way of using this metric to create a way of testing students' answers. What they do is take this metric, which is, it gives you an integer number of single character edits, and then they renormalize it by dividing by the maximum length of the strings involved. And that gives us a similarity. If you subtract that from 1, you basically get a similarity. And then the answer test involves creating 2 lists, an allow list of the strings which are acceptable and a deny list of the strings which are unacceptable. And you calculate the similarity of what the student types to each of the things in the allow list. And then you calculate the similarity to each of the things in the deny list. And you want to make sure that the most similar string is in the allow list, and that the similarity of the student string to the most similar string is better than some pre-specified tolerance. So if we come back to this question and just look at the question tests, I've got some, this is on the development server, as you can see. I've still got some notices to tidy away, but what we're doing here is we are taking, I'll go for one that's not completely, so just one test case. Okay, so let's add another test case and let's get the first input. It was complete the square, wasn't it? So it's a string. And let's get that wrong. Is it going to accept that as correct? Yeah, so that's close enough. So we can see here that what it's done is it has calculated that the string complete square is 0.933 similarity to complete square. And that was one of the strings in my acceptable list. So if we come down to the bottom here, my allow list was complete the square, completing the square, complete square, and my deny list was factor solve square, right? And I chose somewhat arbitrarily here a similarity of experience of using this answer test yet, but I can see why this is going to be a really valuable. And I think in practice, what we're going to have to do is fine tune these tolerances and the allow and deny list until, in a situation like this, we are sure that we have fenced off the allow and deny strings. But as a combination with the computer algebra support and now some robust text-based support with spell checking built in, this I think is a really powerful and exciting combination for kind of proof-based questions, longer derivations and the like. So if you would like to have a go at this, it's in the dev branch. If you'd like to have a pre-release test, comments and discussion of this would be very, very welcome. And the last thing I want to talk about is the HELM workbooks that we started last year. This is work that has been really pushed on by my colleague Konstantina. It's in one of the case studies. We started translating the HELM workbooks into foreign languages, but the HELM workbooks are a collection of 50 workbooks. They cover most of first and second year mathematics for engineering, and we now have about 2/3 of those up and ready for release. So if you'd like to find out more about what the HELM workbooks are, please have a look here. But we now have about 2/3 of a large engineering textbook in a consistent style, all battle tested over 2 academic years. And that will ultimately be released as open educational resources. So a lot going on, quite an exciting future. But in terms of the next release, we have support for Moodle 4, major rewrites of some internal components and some quite exciting new features. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Chris. It was really exciting, especially this new development about spell checking and so on. But let me now open the floor for questions. Again, as far as I can see, there is nothing in Moodle, or I'm not looking at the right discussion. I think there's nothing really there. But yeah, but maybe one question from my side. When you talk about this autocorrection, when there is some kind of a spelling mistake they can be corrected based on some previous entries. And
yeah, the teacher will have to specify what's allowable and what is a tolerance. So the similarity tolerance.
Yeah, so it means
that automatically condones a few spell checking mistakes. You know, if you mistype a single character, or you know, their THERE versus TH,
yeah,
you know, the different spellings, or principle, you know, those kinds of minor things. If the teacher chooses to, by having a wide enough similarity, acceptable range, then we're not going to be penalizing students automatically. It's a long way from a string match. Yeah. And unlike regular expressions, you won't have to predict what they are. I mean, I have to say, I have not used this feature in Anger yet, but I can immediately see it's an exciting feature. And I can immediately see it fills an important gap in allowing us to ask for, and the real power of it, I think, is the multi-part questions, where you can have the text-based input as a multi-part question with some algebraic input. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about, well, why isn't this a separate question type? But it's the multi-part questions that are really the compelling case, I think. So if people would like to talk about that with me and start to think about how we might use it, I'd very much welcome a separate discussion. This is hot off the presses. I mean, I only found out about this in late April at the STAC conference, and I'm hugely grateful to Akim and Andreas for being so generous with the code they'd written in allowing me to include it in the STAC core. I mean, the algorithm itself, this actually vindicates my whole approach here, folks, in having the full computer algebra system, because this is quite a complex algorithm, but it turns out to be 8 lines of code when you have full matrices and reliable libraries for manipulating matrices. So the fact that they can program this algorithm in an efficient and effective way with so little code was a real vindication of having the full computer algebra system underneath. So I hope that other people will have opportunities to write similar libraries and share them now that they can include. I mean, these, poor Andreas and Akim were copying this code from question to question, and every time they wanted to change, part of their design, they had to update every question, and that's just ridiculous. So these new features that Matt has introduced should make innovations like this so much easier in the future.
Especially because it looks like on the first glance that it's invariant to the language, but
right. So that's absolutely right. So colleagues who have one thing that Matty suggested was that we need support for ignoring diacritical marks, for example, right? So there are some things that just don't occur in English. Right. I mean, it is by default, it's case insensitive. That was my choice, but there'll be other kinds of insensitivity that different languages need. So if you want to get started trying this out, then please let me know what you need, and we'll try and get it in the main libraries as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, let me just look again at the Moodle. Nothing so far, but yes, there can be later on some discussion and questions. That's the reason why we are using Moodle. So thank you very much, Chris.